Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we're going to talk about mindful living, cultivating present moment awareness for enhanced well-being. And our guest is a virtual guest all the way from Singapore today. And I'm very excited to talk to her about this topic. I really love her presence ever since we started talking before the recording. And I'm quite sure it's going to be a really mindful conversation, and also we'll learn a lot from her. So please join me in welcoming Erin to our podcast. And by way of introduction, Erin Lee is founder and mindfulness coach of Mindful Moments Singapore. She is a mindfulness practitioner and advocate of mindfulness as a way of life. It is her personal vision to help more and more people learn mindfulness skills and incorporate mindfulness practice into their daily lives to improve their well-being. Thank you so much for joining us today, Erin. How are you?
I'm good, Lou. Thank you for inviting me to join the show.
Yeah, I'm excited because I think mindful living is a new topic to a lot of people. If someone is into mindfulness and, really wants to sort of cultivate it in their lives, this is nothing new. But mindful living is probably a new concept because I know we've talked a lot about mindfulness on this show particularly, but not mindful living just yet. So I'm also excited to learn more about it. And I'm really curious when I read your bio because, you've got into this field professionally. And, normally people are just kind of like trying to learn more about it. And to do this professionally must be because of a certain reason, right? So I would love to hear more about your journey, why you got here, and especially why you chose to do this work that you're doing.
Yeah, I'd love to share more about this. I haven't always been doing this, obviously. I was working in the corporate world, specifically corporate communications, for about 10 years. And throughout that 10 years, I really made myself miserable. I didn't know how to take care of myself. I didn't know how to pay attention to myself. And so I constantly went into these cycles of burnout. And with every job that I took up, it's always 200%, and then exhaustion, and then burnout, breakdown, and then I would quit the job. I would find a new job to just begin the whole cycle again. So this went on for almost 10 years. And my last corporate comms work was in Beijing, and I spent 2 years there. And that was sort of like the last straw on the camel's back. And I was in a really bad shape. But I was at the brink of a breakdown, and I was really fortunate to have a good friend who saw that I was in a bad shape. And she said, why don't you go for one of those meditation retreats? And she used the air quotes because she didn't know what she was talking about. And I didn't know what she was talking about. But something clicked, and I decided to Google nearest meditation retreat. And I found a center in Taiwan that taught mindfulness meditation. And of course, I had no idea what it was going to be like. But I decided to take time off work. I traveled there, and I had to just check myself in. They took away my phone. They took away my laptop. And basically every day was just 10 hours of meditation, mindfulness meditation, and eating well and resting well and sleeping. And a little detail that I had left out before was that prior to mindfulness, I had a lot of self-destructive habits because I didn't know how to take care of myself. And this included a really unhealthy relationship with alcohol. I was basically using alcohol as a way to cope with the stresses, the struggles that I was going through. And so I couldn't imagine going a day without alcohol. And of course, at the retreat center, alcohol wasn't available. It wasn't allowed. So through that 10 days, I didn't drink any alcohol. And when I emerged 10 days later, I was quite amazed that I didn't have to drink. And I felt really well. I felt like I was healed and I had recovered. And what's really interesting was that that very day when I left the center, I went back to the city of Taipei. And that very evening, I went to a bar and I got myself drunk on the streets of Taipei. And it's funny on hindsight, but it was also really insightful because that was when I realized that as helpful as it was, mindfulness meditation is not a magic pill. It's not therapy. It's not an overnight transformation. It's really a lifelong journey for me. So I was sober enough to recognize how it could potentially help me and transform my life, even just feeling that little bit of change. And so that was when I decided I had to continue with this practice every single day. I had to keep up with it. And then I decided to get myself trained as a teacher. And so that's where I am today. And what I do every day is to endeavor to share this with as many people as I can.
Wow, that's really amazing. I love that story. I think a lot of us can resonate with that because the thing is, we don't normalize talking about the, 9 to 5 everyday struggle enough. If you go onto the internet or the social media, a lot of people are just talking about how, they are entrepreneurs and they're doing all these amazing things, but everyone sort of has a backstory and they all kind of sound the same. You go to the corporate world, you get burnt out, you don't know what you're doing with your life. And then thanks to that kind of feeling lost, and feeling frustrated, you find your calling in a way. I know it sounds super cheesy, but I've heard so many stories like yours that I'm kind of thinking there has to be something here. And for you, it is mindfulness, and I think mindful living is especially a very different thing too. And look, I said a lot of people can resonate with this, and probably people on our very team can resonate with this. I myself resonate with parts of your story, and so I think it's something that we can invite more people to talk about at the very least, and hopefully after our conversation today, we can also inspire others in a way to, if they haven't tried it before, take up mindfulness and mindful living, because, everyday moments are there's so many of them. You're going to do so many things in a day, and there will be moments where we are mindful and moments where we're not, right? So I don't think it is a fail to, not have mindfulness at all times. And we'll explore this in a little bit when we talk about the topic. Before we do that, we have a section where we get to know the guest a bit better. And today we have a section that we're going to call Have You Met Erin? I'm going to get some recommendations from you. Since you're very onto mindfulness, I'm keen to hear what the things that you like would be. The first thing I always ask my guests, my favorite question, is what is a book you would recommend?
Oh, there are so many. I found this to be really hard. Just in terms of mindfulness, I would really recommend any books by Thich Nhat Hanh and Bhante G. So there is a book by Bhante G that's really good called The 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, or Mindfulness in plain English. I think for anyone who would like to get a head start on mindfulness and really get to the essence of it, but in a really simple way, these 2 books are the way to go.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that. And what about a movie recommendation?
One of the more recent movies that's really left an impression on me is A Star is Born by Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. It's just really impactful, I think, and just to look into the, we talk about wellness, we talk about well-being, and I think even if we're not stars or singers or performers like they are in the movie. I think we can all relate to some of the struggles that they go through.
Yeah, definitely. The emotions, the struggles, the failing and the winning, and what seems to be glamorous, but in reality, not really so. Definitely, I love that movie too. Thank you for that. What about a podcast recommendation?
I have an anchor podcast that I tune into, and that's Heart to Wisdom. It actually features the teachings of one of my favorite teachers, Jack Kornfield. And I would recommend that if you're really interested in the teachings of mindfulness, then this is a great podcast to tune into.
Okay, I've never heard of that before, so thank you for that recommendation.
No problem.
Next question is about your role model. Now, I always say to my guests, this could be a famous person or your personal role model in your life. And if you give us both, even better.
Sure. The first person to come to mind actually would be the Buddha. He is, I've never obviously met him in person, but just through learning mindfulness and through the books that I've read, all that I've studied, he is one of the greatest teachers for me. And he is definitely a role model for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. And final question in this part. What is a course you've completed that has really left a strong impact on you?
So one of the recent courses, I really believe in lifelong learning, and I'm constantly taking up courses. I am still taking up a course right now as we speak. And one of the recent courses that I've completed is something called Satipatthana. It's actually the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
Oh, very on brand. And
Yes.
I love that, you're sort of doing work in this area and you're still training yourself, not like a self-proclaimed expert. I know everything and I'm not learning more about it. So yeah, I really love that. And yeah, I love the concept of lifelong learning. That's pretty much what we are here for. And, everyone on our team is basically with that spirit at all times. So I really love that. Thank you. So yeah, we've now got to know you a bit better. So let's talk about mindful living. I know it's a very big topic with lots of words, but the key concept would be mindful living in the context of our well-being. And so because we're talking about well-being, let's start there first to paint a big picture. Then we'll go and talk about mindful living. So Erin, what does well-being mean to you personally?
Personally, when I think about my own well-being, it's always about being at ease. And I know that a lot of people think that, well-being, they relate it to being happy. But, I realize that I'm never always happy all the time. But what I really would desire to have in life, in day-to-day life, is to be at ease. And I think in today's world, we live with a lot of disease. The word disease comes, it really means you're in a state of dis-ease or discomfort with the way things are. And so disease doesn't just mean, like a physical disease. It can be a mental disease or emotional disease, social disease. And so when we're well, I think on all fronts, for me personally, I would like to feel ease in any moment as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, I love that. You kind of break down the word, disease, and then, you cut a part of it and it turns into ease. I really like that because I feel like I've talked about it a few times on this show and the other show that I'm also hosting for LMSL about happiness. And I realized that there's, this big misconception. And this is my personal observation that, if you are happy, if you're well, it has to, like, everything has to feel upbeat and you got to feel like amazing at all times. And I used to feel like that for a really long time when I was younger. But now, like having grown a little bit more and, had more perspectives, having talked to a lot of people, having been through things, I've realized that it's so important to just be comfortable in your own skin and to be comfortable doing nothing sometimes or, doing the mundane things and really enjoy that. It's hard because a lot of people kind of like, oh, like, it's just the same thing over and over again. Oh, like again, with the cooking, with the cleaning, with the, going to the gym. And it's not actually that bad because I have really asked this question to many people, including people that I've, worked with, my colleagues, my team. How do you enjoy the just the mundane moments. That's hard, right? And so I think that's kind of like one of the things that I picked up when you talk about ease. It sounds like you're really focusing on being present with yourself, and of course, it goes back to being mindful, right? Because you're being there with yourself, but you're not uncomfortable because there's nothing happening on the surface. In fact, it actually brings you a lot of peace and joy and wellness. So that's kind of like one of the things that I noticed, and one of the biggest misconceptions that I think people have about well-being. But obviously, you've worked in this field now professionally, and you've done the corporate jobs, so you know it all. I wonder what you think to be some of the biggest misconception people have when it comes to well-being.
So, on top of what we have just talked about, just having to feel happy or be happy or upbeat all the time, another misconception I think people have about well-being is that we should only try to be well when we are unwell.
Mm.
I've always believed that well-being and mindfulness in particular should take on a more preventative approach. And it's often a little too late when we want to be well when we're already feeling unwell, because there is obviously a build-up. Feeling unwell doesn't just happen like that. So there has been a build-up over some time. It's just that we are not used to paying attention to feeling unwell, or we choose to ignore, or we choose to distract ourselves. So it's really, like you said, in the most mundane moments of our lives, and when we learn to pay attention, we're able to just notice what is happening within us from moment to moment, the happy moments, the unhappy moments, the mundane, boring moments. And from there, then we're able to recalibrate ourselves as necessary. So it really has to be practiced on an everyday basis, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That is so true. I think I mentioned this to one of my podcast guests the other day when I talked about meditation, because, I'm pretty new to it. I'm not, that deep into meditation, and I mostly follow guided meditation. I haven't been able to, sit with myself with like no guidance whatsoever and do just, meditation like that. But what I have found was, even when in this particular year of 2023, like there are moments where I felt amazing, and the meditation started when I didn't feel amazing, but there are moments when I felt amazing, and I was kind of like, oh, it's a habit now, and it's helped me so much, and there's no guarantee what's going to come tomorrow. So I would love to just keep meditating daily, and find different ways to connect with myself, and whatever it is that I am going through or I have gone through. So I found that it's actually really helpful in the sense that it grounds me, because I feel like if I had stopped meditating, I would be in a very different place right now mentally. Because as our days go by, our life happens, things change. Sometimes good things happen, sometimes not so great things happen, and then you just kind of, you don't have the tools to cope. And oftentimes, I think you mentioned this at the very beginning, and I'm like, yeah, we all have destructive habits, right? And so it's easy to fall back into destructive habits, and it's really good to have something to anchor you and to work on your well-being at all times. And in saying this, I'm not perfect. I'm far from it. Nobody is, I know, but I'm not saying that I'm doing all the great things, because I still have destructive habits that I know I need to get rid of. I know that it's a journey, and so when you said it's not, like being, like just doing the taking care of ourselves when things go wrong, I think that is so true, because for a lot of people, even my friends, right? Sometimes they're kind of like, "Oh, my life's great," and I'm like, "Yeah, good for you." So, and then what are you doing for yourself? To nurture yourself and your well being. And more often than not, the answer would probably be, "Well, I just go about my day." And so I think that is where a lot of us, forget to, take care of ourselves, in the sense that you were saying. So totally agree with that. And I think there's really something there that we need to not just talk about more often, but teach kids, because I don't think kids get taught, how to take care of themselves better, or, how to kind of ground themselves in a way that would help them to deal with difficulties and challenges when they come, i.e. we end up with adults who have destructive habits and who do not know how to navigate themselves. So yeah, I think that's just my observation when I heard your answer. But yeah, I think it's a great one that you just identified. Yeah. Yeah. Always happy to share. I'm here on this show to overshare sometimes, and I'm representative of the audience. I hope they can relate with that. So we've talked about well-being. We've talked about some of the misconceptions, and the one that you mentioned is a really big one. I love that. So now we move on to the topic. Okay, so now let's talk about mindfulness and mindful living. Two concepts, I mean, two very big words, I think hard to explain. But I wonder how you would define mindfulness and mindful living.
Well, you're right. They are big words in a way that, we talk about them all the time. But when it really comes to actually being mindful and living mindfully, what does that mean? So let's start with just mindfulness. There are a lot of definitions out there, but I think the two simplest definitions that I've heard is that mindfulness is knowing what you're doing as you're doing it, and knowing what is happening as things are happening. It's, as simple as it gets. So mindfulness really starts from attention, how we pay attention and how to use this attention effectively. So it's not all about just, focusing in the present moment. It's a lot of noticing what's going on and just being able to see things as they are. And so if we're able to bring these skills into our daily lives and integrate them into the moments of our daily lives, then that's mindful living. So it can be as simple as when you're brushing your teeth. You know that you're brushing your teeth instead of allowing the mind to wander off to thinking and planning nonstop about what's going to happen tomorrow. And it can be as simple as being present with the person that you're interacting with and lending a listening ear, deep listening, and being non-judgmental towards the conversation. It can be just being able to watch yourself, observe yourself in times of difficulty, in times of stress, what's arising within the body, what's arising within the mind, and being able to keep a gentle watch on yourself and regulate your response. So that's essentially mindfulness and mindful living.
Yeah, I think you're so right in saying that we talk about these things all the time, but in practice, I think it's not just not knowing what they are actually about, but we probably don't pay attention as much. And so we can do all the talk, right? We can talk about it and we can define it. We can say what is right and what is wrong. But I think at the end of the day, to me as a regular human who knows about the concept and trying to do better, I know that it's in the back of my mind, yes. But when life's happening and when things are stressful, like being mindful and living mindfully would be the last things I want to do, because it's easier for me to run away. It's easier for me to just sit on my couch, hug my cat, and just do nothing, compared to actually paying attention to the feeling and do something about it. And I think I have a story to tell when it comes to this, because I think one of the best things that I have found growing up, when it comes to mindfulness, is probably journaling. And, I grew up really great at journaling. I journal every day before bed. And then I grew up, and then life happened, and then I stopped. And recently, one of my friends started this little group, just people in her life who are interested in, sharing gratitude and good things. And so she started this little group. It's just a messenger group of 4 of us. And what we want to do together is to share our gratitude list every day. It can be daunting to share it, especially with people that you don't really know. And so initially I was I was half excited, half scared when it comes to it, because, as an adult, I'm sure everyone can relate to this. There are things that you're so grateful for, but you don't really want to talk about because it's kind of, like it's a little bit embarrassing,
embarrassing,
or or it could be like you feel like you're exposing yourself.
You feel
And
vulnerable for sharing.
yeah, the vulnerability is real. Like, especially like Brene Brown said, it's kind of like the vulnerability hangover, in a way, when you're sharing, even when you're sharing with your closest friends. Now, long story short, I started out strong. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, going to commit every day. And I'm going to, mindfully journal. And that went on for a few days. And then life happened again. And then I started to fall out of it. And then I was like, oh, okay, now I'm not, mindfully journaling. And I feel like I'm just doing a chore. And so I'm kind of like, I kind of thought about it. And then I thought, why was it so easy for me as a kid to do this? I had this really simple routine as a kid. I had nothing that I wanted. Now as an adult, I have everything I'd ever wanted as a kid. But I suck at being mindful, and I'm not great at mindful living anymore. I was great at it as a kid. And so I'm sharing this story, not because I have an answer to my problem, but because I think the key is to tune in to yourself when you catch yourself feeling these things. And I guess, as that is a really big part of self-discipline. It's kind of related as well, right? Because I think it's really easy for you to just say, I don't have to answer to anyone today. I'm just going to do whatever I want. But actually, mindfully savor the day, or, reflect on your day really helps. And maybe sometimes it'll feel like a chore, but it's good to remind ourselves. And I'm sharing this story so I can, I'm reminding my own self today to keep doing that. Yesterday I did journal. I was great at it, but I did not write down my gratitude list to share with the group. And I forgive myself for that. It's just interesting when you talked about, mindfulness and mindful living, because I feel like if we are doing everything mindfully, then it'll be really easy to incorporate these little things into our days. But I feel like a lot of us are on autopilot. Because it's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. We're just mostly forgetful people nowadays. and you sharing your story about journaling and practicing gratitude, and it just reminds me of the many people that I've worked with as well. And it may not be journaling; it may be some other forms of mindfulness practice. It could be, like meditation. And there is also this element of getting them to journal down what comes up for them every time they practice mindfulness or they meditate. And, often they would come back to me and say, I didn't really practice much this week. And so I didn't really journal, and I don't really know what to talk about today with you. And, then I would get them to consider that whether or not you practice, every moment of your experience in itself is an opportunity to practice. Even the moments when you're not practicing is a moment of practice. And all it takes is just noticing what's going on. So in that moment, you may have been procrastinating on journaling or meditating, and you notice what's going on with that procrastination, what's going on in the mind, what's going on in the body, where is that reluctance coming from? When you forget to journal and you're noticing some guilt, maybe a little embarrassment or shame, and then you look into that and you notice what's here. Does this emotion show up in the body? And that is in itself a moment of mindfulness. And that's really how we practice it. So it's not so much of, even though routines really help us, it really helps to ground us, but there will be moments where routines don't stay constant. And they change all the time. And it's really about the process of noticing how we are responding to these changes in our lives.
Yeah, that is very true. Look, I think I shared that little story because I feel like a lot of people can resonate with that and relate to it. Because as I said, and you briefly touched on this as well, we probably don't notice when we're not noticing. That's kind of like what is similar to what you were saying to me. And, mindful living can be observed when it comes to work as well. Right now, I'm talking to you, interviewing you on this podcast. This is a great experience of my day. Like, this is one of the highlights of my day, right? But I have to confess, sometimes in recordings, my mind would wander because we're talking about a certain topic, right? And then I'll be thinking about something that's related to the topic, and I'll be like, oh, what should I do about this and that today? Like, oh, like, I need to mindfully do the chores today or something.
Yeah.
And that is also me catching myself not being
Yes.
mindful,
Yes,
thinking
absolutely.
about mindfulness. So
Yes.
it can happen like that. And I feel like the trick is just to be kind to yourself, because when you catch yourself, you bring yourself back to the moment. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what's really important here is that noticing, because what we don't usually realize is that the moment you notice that you have wandered away, you are already back in the present. And that's what the practice is about.
Yeah. So I think you just sort of already explained. We have a question about sort of explaining what mindful living is in simple terms. But I think you already did that by saying sometimes we can be on autopilot, sometimes we can be reactive in life. And that is because we are not paying attention. But mindful living is not, oh, I'm not on autopilot, or I'm not reactive, I'm very much aware of what's going on. It's not all of that. It's rather, maybe I am on autopilot right now, but I caught myself being on autopilot and I redirect my attention. And I think that would be a more accurate way and a better way of looking at it, because a lot of people can get really scared, and because it sounds daunting, right? You have to pay attention all the time, and that means taking charge of your life. That means being really aware of whatever's going on, and it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of effort, I would say. It's easier because sometimes we're tired, and the last thing we want to do is pay attention. Like I'm sure everyone can relate to this. You have a moment at a cafe, you're about to place an order to your coffee, and then instead of saying your name, you say your colleague's name or something, because you're not paying attention, you're thinking about something else, and so it's just catching yourself, laughing it off, and redirect that attention rather than being embarrassed, because I think it's so easy to be embarrassed by these little things. It happens all the time. It happens to me more often than not, and I used to find it really hard to laugh at myself, but now I find it so much easier, because I'm like, oh, I was just not mindful. Haha, I'm back. Yeah. Thank you. So I explained that, this is how I see mindful living to be different. And, in very simple terms, how it's different from being on autopilot and being reactive in life. But I'm wondering if you want to add anything else to that, in case we didn't cover some of the other concepts.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about this paying attention requiring effort. And I think it's very true, because we are just so conditioned to be living on autopilot nowadays. And there is just another common misconception about mindfulness that I wanted to share here, is that a lot of people see being mindful as relaxing, and, the practice of mindfulness as like a kind of a spacing out, blanking out, like you said, right? We've had a tired day and we just want to sit down with a cup of coffee, and then we just basically want to not think about anything and just allow the mind to drift. And a lot of people may not know that this is actually not a state of mindfulness, spacing out, because mindfulness is all about awareness. And when we're spaced out, where is our attention? It's not connected to the present moment. And so, yes, even though spacing out feels really good, I really enjoy it sometimes as well, but we have to recognize that it's not a state of being mindful. And so, yes, there is a need for us to put in effort and be intentional about this paying attention. And it may be difficult for a start, just because over years we have been conditioned to be on autopilot. But with practice, I think with diligent practice every day, with intentional practice every day, this awareness also becomes something that's very natural for us. And instead of thinking of it as like a total relaxation when you're being mindful, I would say that the state that we're closer to would be what we call relaxed alertness. So it's a state of being awake, being wakeful, and just in the know of everything that's happening around you. But the quality of your attention is also relatively free of tension. And that's why it's a state of relaxed alertness. Yeah.
That is such a great concept, relaxed alertness.
Yes.
Yeah, I was my mind was wandering thinking about that, to be very honest.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, because I'm like, oh, Relaxed alertness. Okay, that's interesting. Like I think we all have been through that, or we might have been able to do that at a certain point, but it's just now mindfully noticing when it is happening.
Yeah. It
That's
used to go
interesting.
unnoticed, but now
Yeah,
we're starting to notice it. Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of it's a kind of productive rest in a way, because I talked about this on another podcast, but it was basically about how we are always in this zone where we need to do more all the
Yes.
time. And if we're
Yeah.
not doing anything, we're not productive, and therefore we're not taking care of ourselves, or we're not being, a good human of some sort. And
Yes.
it's so not true, because I feel like that, relaxed alertness you talk about would be similar to just doing nothing and really enjoying doing nothing
Oh,
at a certain point, because that helps you to relax and boost your well-being. That's so important.
yes. And there's a reason why it's called well-being, right? It's not well-doing. So
Yeah.
we don't have to keep doing stuff. We can just be with what's here, and it doesn't mean that we're being unproductive or nothing is happening.
Yeah. Very true. And another thing about well-being is we avoid stress at all costs, right? Whenever we hear the word stress, we're kind of like, oh, that's bad. I
don't want it. I don't want stress.
Yeah, I don't want it, get away. Or sometimes when we are feeling unpleasant or going through tough emotions, we're kind of like, I hate this. I don't want this. Just go away. It's very common. Everyone does that. I do that more often than not. I can tell you that. And so I wonder how we can incorporate mindful living into this act of coping. Of course, we're talking about healthily coping with stress and healthily managing our mental well-being, because it's not about ignoring the stress, running away from the stress, or not wanting any stress at all. Life doesn't work that way, right? And I'm sure with mindful living, we can find ways to achieve that. And so what are some of the ways that mindfulness and mindful living can help us with this?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think fundamentally, the approach of mindfulness towards stress can feel quite counterintuitive to a lot of us. Because like you said, when we encounter any forms of stress or anything that we feel uncomfortable with, or even pain, it could be physical pain, it could be mental, emotional pain, our first instinct is to want to turn away from it. And this is why we live in a culture where, there's so much, for example, addictions or consumerism, because these are all avenues for us to distract ourselves, just because we don't want to face that discomfort, face that pain. But what we don't realize is that this turning away doesn't actually address the root cause of the issue, which is very often the relationship with your pain. So while we can't avoid stress, we can't avoid pain in day-to-day life, but we can change our relationship with it and choose to not engage with it as intensely as we did before. And so the fundamentals of mindfulness, the mindful approach to managing stress, first and foremost, is to turn towards stress rather than running away from it. And this is usually the biggest hurdle with mindfulness, right? Because nobody wants to turn towards pain. And that's why we learn to do it in meditation, when we're sitting down in stillness, and when a pain comes up, or a disturbing thought comes in, and instead of running away, we stay with it. We learn to just rest with it and just be able to watch it, observe it, without necessarily engaging with them or reacting towards them. And so we approach stress this way, not as a way to get rid of stress from our lives or even reduce stress, but to change how we relate to it. And these skills can only come from practice. And I would say that it's not enough to practice this when stress comes to you. It's not possible. And I always use the analogy of swimming. I ask people this question: why do you learn to swim? Do you learn because it's a recreation, it's for fitness? No, right? It's actually survival. It's a survival skill. But do you only practice swimming when you're drowning in the ocean, for example? You can't, right? So every day in the most mundane moments of your life, you practice in the safety of a swimming pool, perhaps with under the safety of a coach guiding you. And every day you just practice the same strokes over and over again until you get good enough. And in case one day you really do drop into the ocean, you have the skills to save yourselves. And we have to see mindfulness this way as well. John Kabat-Zinn said that, we have to practice mindfulness like our life depended on it. And I think it's really true. So when we practice mindfulness, we don't practice it for stressful moments. I mean, we do, but we don't only practice it during stressful moments. We have to practice it in the most mundane moments of our lives, every day, practicing sitting, resting with, integrating it into everyday moments. And then we'll get good enough at it. And one day when stress hits us, we will have the skills to navigate.
Yeah, that's so good to hear, because I think when you mentioned survival skills, I think it hits home for a lot of people. Stress is, as I said before, something that we all try to run away from, but it's always going to be there. Like even when you go through the best moments in your lives, for example, I think this is something everyone can relate to. You're so excited about the prospect of, let's say, moving into your dream house. Everyone can probably relate to the feeling. And guess what? You have to pack. You have to move, you have to sort things out. You have to do all the admin stuff. And the stress comes with that, even in the best moments and with the best things that happen. And then other things could happen on the day to day as well. And you're kind of like, oh, like I always look forward to dinner time. Great. But then who's going to do the cooking and cleaning, right? That's stress. A little bit, not too much. But I think you're so right in saying that it's a survival skill, because we tend to get overwhelmed when it's a lot of stress, one on top of another. And that's where it becomes really evident that if we don't have the skill to deal with it, it can actually kill us. Because, it is a thing, right? A lot of people go through exhaustion. And I think chronic stress, chronic depression can have a severe impact on our physical health. And, a lot of people cannot deal with that. And that leads to fatalities, unfortunately. So it is right to be considered a survival skill, to be able to tune in with our stress. And as I said, I'm not great at it, but I know that I have a tendency of running away a lot of the times. And I think probably, at least half of the audience members would probably be able to relate with this. I don't know about people that are just like, yeah, stress, bring it on. I know a lot of people who are like me, who can kind of say, this is so stressful. I do not want to do anything. And I just want to go out tonight. Instead of dealing with the stress of cleaning and tidying my apartment, let me just go out tonight. Instead of, sitting with myself and addressing my not so great behaviors or my destructive habits, let me just do it and, go out and do a little more of the destructive habits of, drinking, for example. A lot of people do this. And you used to be one of those people, and you said that yourself, right, at the beginning, that's what happened. So mindful living really helps in that sense, because I think we don't notice when we are running away. We probably notice in hindsight, but not when it's happening.
Yes. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And one of my biggest concerns about mindfulness and how it's being perceived is that people can think that it's about enjoying the present moment. There's an element of enjoyment. And so, like you said, right, I don't want to face my problems. And so I'm just going to indulge in some kind of sensual pleasures in the present moment. And this can result in, I'll go shopping, I'll go watch a movie, I'll go drink alcohol, I'll go clubbing. And some of my students would say, oh, it's like YOLO, right? It's like, you only live once. So let's forget about everything and let's just be mindful about life and enjoy life. And I'd be really quick to try to clarify that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So that's one of the misconceptions, because people can, if people look at this in the wrong light, it could be detrimental to us. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions. Mindful living and being mindful or having mindfulness is not about YOLO.
Yes, exactly.
Not at all. And in fact, you just said it. One of the misconceptions also is to be mindful of the pleasant moment, or like whatever is happening now that is pleasant. No, it's actually both. When something's pleasant that's happening, you notice that. When something's unpleasant that's happening, you also notice that.
Yes.
And so that would be, one of the biggest misconceptions. I really love that you addressed that. What about some other misconceptions that people might have about mindfulness and mindful living?
Well, the common ones I can think of right now is just mindfulness being about having to empty the mind or clear the mind. I think that's quite a common one, and especially when people sit down to meditate, and they may intellectually know that they don't have to empty the mind, but when it comes to the actual practice, when we sit, let's say we sit with the breath or we sit with the body. And then, they would get distracted by their own thoughts, and then they would get really frustrated about that. And they would come to the conclusion that, it wasn't a good practice for me. And so that's where the inquiry comes in. It's really important to inquire into your experience after a practice. Like, what did you notice? What came up for you? How did you relate to that experience? And when they inquire into it, then they realize that they were forming judgments about whether their practice was good or bad. And it's not really about that. It's about noticing it and just taking every moment as a practice, what we've talked about before. So every time the mind wanders away, and what we just need to do is to guide the attention back to what we want to pay attention to. And that's it. That's the practice. And we repeat this over and over and over again. And that's really what the practice is about. So it's not so much about not having to think about anything, or just having a peaceful, zen, chill out kind of state of mind, and really being with the mind as it is, and learning to, again, change your relationship with the mind, whether it's thoughts or emotions. So that's another misconception, I think, that's not commonly addressed is that people tend to equate being mindful as focusing. So if I'm mindful, I'm focused. And so the question that I usually ask is, have you met people perhaps, taking public transport and or walking along the streets, and, their head is bowed down and they're looking at their phone, and they're so absorbed in their phone that they don't notice traffic or people walking around them, and end up tripping over things, things like that. So I asked them, were they focused? They said yes. And were they mindful? And they have to think twice about were they mindful? So it's not actually the same thing. And mindfulness is not about being exclusively focused on one thing. It's really about knowing what is happening. And of course, we need to see our attention as something that's flexible. It's a very flexible capacity. We can really zoom in on something and really have very deep focus, and that's sometimes needed. But in day-to-day life, when we want to integrate moments of mindfulness into our everyday life, we can't have this kind of attention. We need to have a more open, widened, expansive, inclusive kind of attention, where we are aware of everything that's going on. So the practice of mindfulness is not only about focusing.
That's really good. I think that's such a great example of one of the biggest misconceptions, because it's funny when you said that, because I was like, that's a classic example of people just want to make it something that they already have, or, saying that, yes, I am mindful, and sort of try to play with the word or the concept in a way that is actually not true, but, can benefit them in some ways. Because if they're like, yeah, I'm very engrossed in, this activity right now on my phone, I'm mindful. No, that's not what this is about. So you mentioned, the example you mentioned sort of got me to think about something. So being engrossed in your phone, whatever's going on there, that's one of the key things that have been impacting relationships nowadays. Right? Because we have a relationship with the self, we have relationships with people around us, and then we have a relationship with unknown things on the internet and other people on the internet i.e., what we look at on our phone all the time. So being mindful and having incorporating mindful living into our lives, I would say to be something that would probably benefit relationships from what I've heard so far. Obviously, from what you just said, you pay attention to everything that's going on. We don't just tune into the good things. We also we're also able to tune into the not so great things, to deal with it, to kind of process it. Same thing happens with relationships, right? You have to be present at all times, and relationships are a big part of our lives. So, it's really easy to, let's say, in a relationship, whether it be friendship or partnership or, parent-children relationship, to say, I'm here with you. I am mindful, right? It's really easy to be like, yeah, I'm right here. What are you talking about? But a lot of the times things go south when, for example, you're conversing and you're kind of like, oh, like this is what's happening. And this is what, like, I really want to get your help or your perspective. Let's say you're talking to a friend, a good friend. And instead of answering the question or helping you with what you're trying to look for, they offer solutions that are kind of unsolicited, or they say something that would hurt you in a way because they didn't really hear you. And I know this happens more often than not, and it happens in our lives, right? It could happen to us, or we could be the one doing this unknowingly from time to time. So this is just one of the many things that I'm sure happen out there. And because you work with a lot of people, I'm sure people come to you with similar problems. So I wonder, what are some of the ways that we can incorporate mindfulness and mindful living into the way that we, nurture our relationships, so we can actually improve and, better our relationships?
Right. So first and foremost, I would recommend that we really, really should put away the phone. This reminds me of a story. I used to have a friend. I mean, he's still my friend. But he used to do this all the time. Like, I would be sharing things with him in a conversation, and he would be holding his phone in front of him, and he would be checking his email or going through LinkedIn. And then I would be talking and he'd be doing that. And then I see that he's not paying attention to me. So I would stop. I would deliberately stop talking. And then he would look up and he said, "Why did you stop talking? Keep talking, I'm listening." And then he would go back and continue scrolling through his phone. And I'm like, no, you're not listening to me, because you are only half listening to me. You're half paying attention. And I think this is a common phenomena that we can observe nowadays. And we no longer have the same quality of attention as we did before, way before. And this really impacts communication. So a lot of the practice of mindfulness is really also, I think, about being thoughtful. We probably don't discuss this as much, but it's not all the time about the self, but really how the self is impacting what's around us or who's around us. So when it comes to mindful communications or communicating mindfully, it's beyond self-development. It's beyond self-help. And we mentioned the quality of attention just now and how flexible our attention is. And this mindful communications really require us to have our attention to be flexible and dynamic at all times. And so, let's take the two of us, for example. We're in an interaction right now. And so where should my attention be if mindfulness is really all about paying attention? Should I only be paying attention to you? Right? By right, I should be paying attention to you and be fully present with you, which I'm practicing. But it shouldn't be on you only. I should also be at the same time practicing mindful attention on myself, what I'm saying, my facial expression. And it's not, and you and I are not two separate entities in this interaction, right? So there are exchanges between us, intellectually, energy-wise. And so at the same time, I'm paying attention to myself. I should also pay attention to how I am impacting you with what I say. And at the same time, what you say, how it's impacting me. So it's a really dynamic process. And this requires a very different state of attention than focusing. It's what we call an open awareness. And in this very dynamic process, you're just aware of everything. There's space for us to observe and watch what's going on. And we have the we have the flexibility and also the space and the option to sort of jump in and engage, as and when we deem to be necessary, right?
Yeah.
So this is the basics of communication. So when we pay attention this way, then we will be able to better judge or better, determine what's needed of me in this moment when I'm really paying attention this way. This solution that I'm giving to you, is that really helpful right now? Am I really kind right now? Is that really what the other party needs?
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah. I think a lot of that goes with, empathy and active listening as well, right? It's not just about being mindful, but also it takes more than I'm paying attention to you and I'm paying attention to how I'm delivering my answers. It goes way beyond that, and it's kind of tough when it comes to relationship. I think it's more so being able to read into the cues that are not verbal sometimes, which is important in mindfulness, because the conversation could go really well and you miss a little cue here and there, and then turns out it was not that great later on, or it could still impact you after that. And I think that's where it's really tricky when it comes to relationships. Being mindful in our everyday interactions with ourselves, with the world, and how we carry ourselves, that's already hard, but it can be manageable. Whereas when it comes to relationships, there's so much more. Yeah, it's very complex because it's not just you. It's also, it's another human who could be completely different from you. And a lot of misunderstandings happen. Like I hear this all the time from stories of friends, and looking back on my own life, with all the things that happen. It could just be, you're kind of like trying to like being really mindful in this interaction. For example, Erin, I'm really happy that we get to chat, for example, and maybe I come on a little too strong and I scare you off. And you're kind of like, yes, I'm having a great time too, because you kind of like, you have to be mindful in how you are interacting with me. So you're being really nice. But then in fact, you're kind of like, okay, that's a little bit too much. And you kind of pull back a little bit. But the other person doesn't know, because there are, cues that are not verbal. So I think it's also about being mindful when it comes to interacting and how the interactions follow through later on. What are the things that happen? It's kind of like this big puzzle, right? It's not just about that particular interaction. It's an extension of a lot of different interactions, which is tricky, but I guess in a way it's fun to kind of pay attention to all of that. And you always learn a few things about other people. Yeah, to say the least. I know. Okay, so we've covered a lot, when it comes to mindfulness and mindful living. We've got to sort of share some bits of information and also ways to incorporate this into our lives, and really look out for the pitfalls. But that's, very theoretical. Now let's get a bit more practical. So we have a section where we call, practice, habit, debrief. I know it sounds very serious, but it's not. We just want to get some of your recommendations, because obviously we are going to have a wide range of people who tune into the podcast. Some of them might be really new to this concept of mindful living. Some of them are probably already, practicing it, but might need a little more help. So for those that are tuning into this episode, I'm sure they would be curious to know a practice that you do to live with mindfulness. And, if you want to, you can also expand on that and share a bit more about the different kinds of practice that people who are probably new to the concept, or who are already practicing it, could improve the practice themselves.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So for me personally, how I practice is I make sure that I address both what we call formal mindfulness and informal mindfulness practice. So formal means that you really take the time and space, you put everything aside. And usually what we do with this time and space is to meditate. So I do my meditation every morning, right after I wake up, and I brush my teeth, and I get myself into a more alert state. And then I would sit with my breath and my body. So that's my go-to practice every morning. It may not work the same for everybody. Not everyone is a morning person. You may want to try this at other times of the day, or just before you take rest at night. But for me, I know that morning works best. And so that's my go-to practice for formal mindfulness. And then there's informal mindfulness where you base this on the idea and also the practice that ideally in every waking moment, we are paying attention. There is mindful awareness involved. And so this requires us to intentionally put in effort to bring mindfulness to everything that we do in day-to-day life. So whether it's talking to someone, whether it's going about a mundane daily routine like chores, washing the dishes, or eating a meal, if I can, I will bring mindful awareness to that as much as I can. Even, like walking from one place to another, I really like to put my phone away and just focus on every step and also the environment around me. I think these are practices that really work for me. And if you're starting out, I have this framework that I recommend to everyone, and that's 4 words: think big and start small. So why is it important to think big? Because I think it's really important to clarify for ourselves why we're doing this, what mindfulness means to you. There's just so much talk about mindfulness nowadays, and you may feel really maybe, I don't know, obliged to follow the trend or something. Think, mindfulness may work for me. Should I try it? Should I not? So do a lot of research on that and really understand what it is, how it's being adopted, and really know what it could do for you and how it could transform your life. So have a really good and deep understanding of that. And then once you know that, once you're convinced and you have confidence that this is something that you would like to invest your time and energy in, then start small. So be really practical about it. And you don't have to practice for long durations for a start. My advice is usually to favor consistency over duration. So I would rather that you practice 5 minutes every single day than 1 hour once a week or once a month. So, it could be 5 minutes of just sitting with the breath every day. It could be 5 minutes of brushing your teeth mindfully, drinking a first cup of coffee with full awareness, full presence, and you stick to that same routine every day at the same time. And this really helps to build in the habit. And over time, this kind of awareness will become really natural for you. So I think this is a good way to start.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are really great tips. Think big, start small. I like that. Yeah, I think everyone can try this because it will have a strong impact on our daily lives. I guess we all get really intimidated when it comes to starting anything. Like I told you with my journaling, right? I was like, oh, okay, I can do this every day. And then when it's time, I'm like, oh, it's going to take so much energy. I have this mental block where I'm like, oh, it's going to take so much energy to think about the good things that happen in my day. And I'm like, but when I lie down in bed at night, I'm like, actually, it's not that big. I can easily draft a list right now, instead of having it cluttered in here. But it takes practice. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Little by little every day, you start with 5 minutes and then it will build up to 15. Just like any other practice or habits, any habits in our lives would have to be formed like that. Even the bad ones, right? The first time remember the first time you had a drink and then you had 5?
It started with a sip, right? And then now it's like bottles and stuff.
Yeah. So if we can form our bad habits like that, we can easily form our good habits like that too. It's just a matter of where we put our energy, which is really hard. Again, I am not perfect at this at all. In fact, I'm struggling sometimes. And by sharing this, I'm reminding my own self to change how I approach it. So thank you for sharing that practice. And before we let you go, last part of this podcast is open mic. We would love to invite you to talk about anything you're passionate about. I know you have a topic in mind already, and it sounded interesting. So I would love to hear more about it.
Sure. I would just like to share a little bit more about this sort of like a big idea that I'm nurturing as the core of my work. And that's related to the word nian. So nian is actually a Chinese character and word. And it's also mindfulness translated into Chinese. So mindfulness in Chinese is 正念, or right mindfulness. So what's really interesting about nian, that the character, when you write it out in Chinese, it consists of two other characters. So Chinese is quite pictorial. So it's made up of two characters. And the top part of the character is jin. So jin actually means the present or now. And the bottom character is xin. So in Chinese, xin means the mind or the heart. They actually mean the same thing, xin. So we have jin, xin, so present moment, heart and mind. So what it really embodies the meaning of, just placing our heart and mind in the present moment. And I think that's really apt for the practice of mindfulness. No matter what you're doing, what's happening, as long as we intentionally be present, then that in itself is the practice. And also what's really interesting about the word nian is that it has connotations of memory, of keeping in mind. So for example, if I say 想念 or 怀念, that means I'm keeping somebody or something in mind and really making the effort to remember something. And so this is really important in mindfulness because we discussed before, right? We're basically forgetful all the time. And one of the biggest challenges with being mindful is that we don't remember to practice. And so for a start, it really takes intentional effort to keep reminding ourselves, keeping in mind what mindfulness is, what it could do for us, and how to practice it, and constantly reminding ourselves to practice so that we can live better. And so nian, as a big idea, is really about reminding ourselves to live better. And I wanted to just imprint this word nian in our minds so that we can keep it in mind. And of course, this will be the core of my work moving forward. I'll be developing more resources on this end and to sort of curate more helpful content and creations and communities that can help one another remind ourselves to live better. So that's nian.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm excited to find out more about the resources that you can develop and, continue to see you work on this big idea. It seems like it deserves to be on a TED Talk stage for sure. So I'm going to count on that. And for our audience who would like to find out more about your work or maybe get in touch with you for a collaboration or work with you, how can they find out about you?
So you can visit my website. I have developed the Nian website. It's called nianlife.com, Nian life, life.com. And my personal website, mindfulmoments.sg. And of course, feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there as well.
Amazing. I'm going to do that. I don't think I have you on LinkedIn yet. So yeah, I'll knock on your LinkedIn door. Thank you so much for being here today. I've absolutely loved our conversation. I've learned a lot, especially relearning things is a really big part of our everyday, right? Because I don't think we are that ignorant that we don't know about these things, but sometimes we need a little bit of a reminder. Sometimes we need more guidance to practice it and, improve on it. So thank you. I think that's what you have really done for us today. And I just love your energy. Even though we're not in the same physical room, I really enjoy talking to you virtually. And hopefully Likewise. We'll have you back some other time. It's hopefully. Really fun.
Yeah. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Yeah. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.